Thank you. Praise the Lord. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for your presence, because we know you're here. Lord, we do nothing on our own strength. We depend on you. We rely on you, your Spirit, to be with us, especially in our time that it's coming to our preparation. Our preparation time is nearing its end, and we're closer to the time where we have to go out and do the work that we have labored. And it just seems sometimes like not enough time, but I know that it'll all work out for your benefit, because we'll never stop learning. And it's such a joy to see everybody in this movement and watching everybody grow. It's so beautiful. It's everybody's being strengthened in your spirit. The knowledge is being increased. The simplicity of the message is being proclaimed. We see your hand in everything, Lord. Thank you so much. Thank you for your hand. And I just pray these things in Jesus' precious name. Amen. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, what do you guys see?
You see yourself.
Manner.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Okay. There's nothing I can do with this bar that's halfway across my screen. Yeah.
Yeah, you should be able to. Is that the toolbar?
Yeah.
You should be able to, if you can see the three dots, click
Yeah.
on the three dots and then choose to hide the floating toolbar.
Oh my goodness, I could have done that the whole time. Okay. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
And so when you
I
want
was
to
always
get,
trying to dodge it, you know, every time I did my thing, I was like, gosh, this is kind of a pain.
yeah, when you want to get it back, hit the escape key on your keyboard.
Oh, sorry. Say that again.
So when you want to get that toolbar back, because you will, on your keyboard, your keys,
Okay.
hit the escape button in the upper left corner, and it will come back. What were you saying, Elaine?
Okay, wait,
I'm saying the same thing that you are.
Okay.
Wait, I'm hitting escape. Oh no, I'm hitting escape on the wrong computer. Okay, I got two computers here.
There you go.
I'm like, why am I hitting it on my laptop and it's not moving? Okay.
I've done that.
Okay. Okay. Greetings, everyone. This is really a great the whole series is fantastic. And we did do the first one. Was it the first one, Christine, last night? Because of the manner of the King of the South, because it seemed like the number one, which is the repeating, the repeating messages.
The repeating pattern was number one, and then I did the second one of this series with Elder Tess was number 4.
Yeah.
And then so number 2 and number 3 was actually Elder Parmenter presenting in Portugal.
So nobody did number 1. That's just a wow.
Right.
Okay.
So number 1 was the repeating pattern, which I was trying to fill in the blanks. So it was like, it was totally necessary for what we were presenting, but I didn't know it until the last minute.
Yeah, that's important. Okay. Well, that was a great, if anybody has not seen Christine's presentation last night, watch it, because it goes along with all this. You can't understand it without it. So anyway, thank you. Okay. So this is a school of the prophets, and it was done in a way where there's a class and people are asking questions, and you could hear some, you can't hear some. And in my video, whoever was holding the camera in the beginning parts of the presentation, when Tess would go up to the board, the camera stayed put, so I couldn't see what she was, pointing at. So I kind of had to, watch other videos and try to, figure out what she's doing. And so it was a little bit of it was tricky, this one. And so this is all Tess. This is her her teaching. I'm not an expert. She is, but there's so many questions that I had too. So I might be asking questions for some of you who have already, who may know the things that I don't know, which I don't know a lot. And I really welcome anybody giving comments or questions, or maybe explaining something that I might not have explained right, because that really makes for better understanding. Okay, we'll get started. Manner of the King of the South. This is a study where we're going to learn about why Steve Bannon believes that we're in a war, and that he believes that there are 4 movements. The American Revolution. I'm just going to do a brief synopsis of what we're going to be covering, and some of the answers of the questions that I'm going to ask is in this synopsis. The American Revolution, the Civil War, the Second World War, and the history after Ronald Reagan. Also, that each dispensation has a message, and that message must produce a change in behavior. We're going to look at the 2520, which is the key that develops time setting. We'll talk about the North and the South and how they are polar opposites. And we went from polar opposites to mirror image. And it's this mirror image that gives us license to go from church over state and state over church. We will compare and contrast Egypt with Babylon, and that they are both paganistic. They are also in a church and state relationship. We will go back to the French Revolution and Daniel 11 to see how they both interacted with the church. We will briefly mention the great courses done by Professor Jeremy McInerney on Alexander the Great in the Hellenistic Age, in particular, lecture 6 titled Egypt under the Ptolemies. We'll look at the Rosetta Stone, which is a contract between Ptolemy V and the priests of Memphis. We'll learn about the definition of atheism and about the church and state model on a sliding scale. Also, how the church and state model compare and contrast a marriage between a man and a woman, and how that can lead to different degrees of control that eventually leads to slavery and ultimately to murder. We will compare and contrast Vladimir Putin with the French Revolution, and that the King of the South doesn't have to be atheistic, but it's still state over church. We'll learn about Stalin and his wife, Aliyeva, and why she killed herself. We'll also look at how Satan counterfeits God, and how a theocracy is one person that wears 2 hats. We will look at Daniel 6 and how Darius is the counterfeit theocracy, and why he doesn't have the power to change laws. We will learn why Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece and Rome all defy their kings, and that all these kingdoms are a theocracy. And finally, we'll learn how kings and leaders always use the church or religion to control their people. I want to move forward today about discussing the King of the South, because we've had a night to think about it. And I want to make sure that we all see this the same way. We originally started with the repeating pattern, and we put that aside, and we saw how in each dispensation, a message was introduced that seemed easy to digest, pleasant even, but not enough to change someone's life. However, in the line of Reformation, each step must somehow transform you from one thing to another thing. So the message must cause a change in behavior. We started with reform lines, which is in an easy concept. It's an easy concept to understand. Most historians use them. In fact, if you were to look into the theology of Steve Bannon, what does he teach about the age that we are living in? Does anybody know? going to try to make this sort of like a class. Does anybody remember what Steve Bannon teaches about the age we're living in?
Well, he says it's the last age too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think he has the same understanding of it, but
No.
And he also ties in the world wars and
Yes, he does.
and
Okay,
the,
so
Ronald Reagan and that.
right. Yes, he does. So he does teach there are 4 movements. Okay. Does anybody remember what those 4 movements are?
one of them's the Civil War.
Yes.
American Revolution, Civil War,
American Revolution is the first one. The Civil War is the second one.
World War II. or World
Yes.
War,
Okay. Very good.
and then Reagan, after Reagan.
Right. Okay. So the first one is the American Revolution. The second one is the Civil War. And the fourth one would be the history after Ronald Reagan. Everything was going good under Reagan. Then somewhere in the 1990s, it went off the rails. Does anybody know what the third one is? And I think Elaine said it. It was, and I'll just read what she said because I want to fully. She said, I would suggest it's the most significant external event. So Steve Bannon believes that the American Revolution is a war and that the Civil War is also a war. But he also believes that we are in a war right now. He calls it a cultural war. And this war is World War II. So you have the American Revolution, the Civil War, and World War II. Steve Bannon uses line upon line, and he also says that we are in the 4th history of a war. Doesn't that sound a lot like our message? Yeah, it sure does. He's even making his own lines and teaching about an information war. He knows that we are in a war right now. It's a war just as real as the Civil War. That is why he fights so passionately. If we said line upon line, would Steve Bannon look at that methodology and have any problem with it? No, he wouldn't. But it isn't much of a challenge. When did it become a challenge? Does anybody know the answer to that question? I think Christine covered that last night. It's not much of a challenge until a specific time comes in, and then it becomes a challenge.
The 2 streams of information.
It happens like, okay, hold on. Right here. Daniel 11. When it develops into 2 lines, Daniel 11:40, part A and part B, and now it starts to impact your life. Now it's going to divide 2 groups at the formalization. Steve Bannon uses line upon line, and we use line upon line, but neither of us would agree with each other in 1989. Do we all understand that? Any comments? So now we come to 2520, and it challenges no one right here. Challenges no one. It doesn't divide or split this movement in any meaningful way. Other people outside this movement might have a problem with it, but it doesn't split this movement because there's no test in it. However, it's going to develop into time setting. In other words, it becomes the key that unlocks time setting, and then it changes your behavior. So it starts off innocent, and then it becomes a test. When you get to Daniel 11:40, people who argue against 1989 say that Ellen White says no new movement and no time setting. This movement and FFA have no problem with that. We have no problem with the quotes that say no time setting and no new movement. But now we come to our latter rain. We recognize the model of geography. And there's a special relationship between East and West. East and West right here. And that it has no set geographical location. Like how Christine was saying, there's no set geographical because everything's just spiraling around. Okay. Then we talked about the north and south, and how they're polar opposites. Then we went from polar opposites to mirror image right here. And we did that real nice last night. That gives us license to go from church over state and state over church, church over state, state over church. So we recognize that they are both opposites, and yet they're the same. And then we went to church-state relationship. So remember last night when Christine was showing those pictures of those mirrors, and each plate they added had a little bit more picture, a little bit more clarity came through. And so that's what this mirror image is all about right here. Sue Ellen, okay, so Sue Ellen makes a comment. Sue Ellen reminds us that there are other kings of the South. And she took us specifically to the Soviet Union and Stalin to show that Stalin was not the atheistic church hating power that he is often represented as. He was only like that for a number of years until he realized he could control the people through the church. I want us to briefly think about these three kings. And I want someone to argue with me because you're all taking it way too easy and I'm not sure that everyone is convinced. So what argument do you want to bring? Because I can think of some. Does anybody want to bring up an argument? Okay. Okay, so let's go back to Egypt. Does anybody have any comments about this? Cause and effect, change of behavior here. Cause and effect has a change of behavior, cause and effect. That should be change of behavior here too. Okay. We're going to go to Egypt. How do we prove that the king of the South was atheistic? In the French Revolution, they tried to eradicate God, but Ellen White is very clear that they are an atheistic power. Let's not use France, instead let's use Egypt. So we're going to go to Pharaoh. And what story would that be? Anybody, what story is that going to be with the Pharaoh?
Moses.
Story of Moses. And what did the Pharaoh say to Moses? Does anybody remember?
Who?
God that he should worship him.
Yeah.
Yes. Who is God that I should worship him? So we take France's atheism and we take the Pharaoh from the story of Moses, and we use those two stories to say that the king of the South is an atheistic power. How do you answer that study that wants to take atheistic France and the Pharaoh in the time of Moses? Okay, I didn't really understand that question that she said, but anyway, does anybody understand that question?
Can you
Yeah,
say
she's,
it again?
Yeah, could you explain that?
No, say
she's
the question
gonna,
again.
go ahead. Go ahead.
It says, how do you answer that study that wants to take atheistic France and the Pharaoh in the time of Moses? That's the question. She says, I'll repeat the question because people were having a hard time understanding it. I've stated that the king of the South is a church and state relationship. And the understanding before that statement in the movement is that the king of the South is atheism. The reason we said it was atheism was because of France in the French Revolution. They're clearly atheistic, and we got that from Ellen White's quotes. We use those two stories to say that the king of the South is atheism or atheistic state. I was asking, how do you counter that argument? Does anybody want to try to counter that argument?
Well, when it was being preached, I kind of had to go along with the movement, believe Ellen White. But in my mind, I knew that they weren't atheistic. They have like 1,000 gods. So those people were not atheistic. They
Yeah,
had all kinds of gods. And
that's
you're
right.
just like, okay, well, this one of those things that I don't understand, but I'm going to go along with it until I figure it out.
Right. Very good.
I think that part of the argument you have to realize is what the statement Ellen White made was for a very small segment of time, because we know France started out, being in a church-state relationship for so long. We know this.
Yeah,
And we know that then when they decided to just get rid of it, it's like they were throwing the baby out with the bathwater. They were going to get rid of it. And so for a short little window of time, they took on an atheistic view of things. And then after that, after those few short years, they realized that that wasn't going to work either. In
Right.
order to have a society that actually functioned, that had any glue to hold it together, that they had to have some form of religion. And so we know that's when they shifted from being the king of the South to the king of the North. And it's amazing how that is. So again, we have to understand the difference. The gist of my thought is, and what Elder Tess and Elder Parman are trying to teach us, is we have to learn the difference between statements that are in the scripture and in the spirit of prophecy, which ones are eternal truths and which ones are only dispensational and only fit a certain time period.
They needed,
Yes.
they needed the church to control the people.
Yes, they did. They realized that after. Okay, very good. So if someone comes to you and says, here's the quote, so her class is still, they're still kind of thinking about the question. They're still trying to figure it out. So if someone comes to you and says, here's the quotes, it's atheistic, how would you answer that? For the king of the South, the power is in the state, but you would argue it allows some religion. If we were to look at Egypt, what's the religion of Egypt? What type of religion do Egyptians have? That's a question.
Paganism.
Paganism, right. So they're not atheistic. So if you were to compare and contrast Egypt with a power from the past, who would that be? If we look back and we compare another superpower that was paganism, what country would that be?
Babylon, Persia, Greece.
Babylon, you got it. That's it. So we know that Egypt is pagan. So is paganism atheism? The Pharaoh is pagan, he's not atheistic. So what's the religion of Babylon? What's the religion of Babylon?
Paganism.
Yes, paganism. So we find Egypt and Babylon, they both have a church-state relationship. They both are paganistic. It's easy to see in Daniel 11, because if we want to know the nature of the king of the South, and if we were to use the correct methodology, we wouldn't look at Vladimir Putin and then go back to see if Ptolemy looks like Putin. That's the wrong order. We should go and understand Ptolemy and then see if Putin looks like Ptolemy, because Ptolemy is the king of the South in Daniel 11. Is Ptolemy atheistic? Because yesterday I said no. If Ptolemy is not an atheistic power, then can you define the king of the South as an atheistic power? No, because you can't do that with the king of the South in Daniel 11. So Daniel 11, the king of the South is not atheistic. So just like what Bob was saying, we have to make sure that when we're reading Spirit of Prophecy in the Bible, that we're doing it, with the right understanding. Regardless of what you see in the French Revolution, it can't be how you define the king of the South. Daniel 11:5, the king of the South, which is Ptolemy, shall be strong, and he'll fight with the king of the North. So we should go back to look at those powers and see how they interacted with the church. So we went back to Ptolemy. I already gave you one source. This is a series of university lectures. Lecture 6, Egypt under the Ptolemies. We mentioned their economy because it's interesting, but it wasn't their economy that we wanted to highlight. What we wanted to highlight was the relationship between the Ptolemies and the Church of Egypt. And I did enclose this link to that particular, I don't know if you guys, anybody listened to it, but anyway, it's an audio set, it's $20. Here's Jerry McInerney, and he's got 24 lectures, and number 6 here is Ptolemy, Egypt under the early Ptolemies. I'm probably going to listen to that.
Could you put that in the chat?
I will. I absolutely will. Yes.
Awesome, thanks.
Okay. Okay. We brought up the Rosetta Stone, and this stone is a contract or a decree that's an agreement between Ptolemy V and the priests of Memphis. It's a decree documenting the relationship between Ptolemy, who is the king, and their pagan religion. So who held the power, the priests or the king?
King.
Ptolemy, who is the king. So the king of the South is paganistic, not atheistic. This is that instance where we were talking about, this is that instance when we were talking about this previously, where the kings will use religion to control the people because it's the easiest way to control the people. Do Catholics, Muslims, or Hindus worship the same God we do? Do they?
No.
No. Does that make them atheistic?
No.
No. The definition of atheism is a belief in no God, not that they don't believe in your God. If Pharaoh says, "What makes you think that your God is better than my gods?" according to the application that Ellen White makes, is that the definition of atheism? No, because all he's saying is, who is your God? Because I have my own gods, and that's not atheism. Okay, so that's the clarification there. So the original king of the South was a church-state relationship, the king and paganism. King and paganism. However, the state had the power. State had the power. And Babylon was the same. But who had the power in Babylon? The king or the church? Who had the power in Babylon?
King.
Okay. Does anybody want to say something else?
In Babylon,
Yes,
who had the power, it was the church.
the church. Babylon is a mirror image of Egypt. When we talk about this state over church model, it's on a sliding scale right here. It's state over church. If you were to think about a marriage where a husband controls the wife, this can take on different forms. It can look nice. Everyone's getting along, but then at some point during the day, the wife might say, "I think I might do this." And then the husband might say, "No, I don't think so. You're not doing that." It can look really subtle, but it's still the husband controlling the wife. In other words, it's still state over church. Then you can see it in different forms and different degrees of control. What's the worst this abusive relationship can become? Some of you are saying atheism, but I'm specifically talking about a relationship. The state says to the church, I no longer want you to exist. Now turn that into a marriage. Every country in the world has the same problem. What does that abuse turn into? Does anybody want to try that? What does that abuse between a husband and wife, between a state and a church?
Slavery.
Yes, it turns into varying degrees of slavery. Then what does it turn into? It doesn't turn into divorce because she's not allowed to leave. What then? After slavery, after the slavery relationship, what then does it turn into when it progresses, as it progresses the control?
Murder and abuse and murder.
Murder, yes. When the husband can't control the wife to his satisfaction, every minute of every day, somewhere around the world, one of these wives are killed. It's constant all over the world. So you have varying degrees of control and abuse. You can think it looks nice, but just look at a modern, traditional Christian family. You can see all along this scale, different degrees of control. It starts looking more and more like the clear slavery that it is. The ultimate turns into murder, where the state just destroys the church. It persecutes and kills her. And that would be atheistic France. It's still a state over church model, just in its most abusive sense. This is violent, but it's turned into physical abuse. When we talk about the King of the South being atheistic, it's not necessarily wrong, but it doesn't mean the King of the South has to be atheistic. The King of the South is state over church. King of the South. That is true for Vladimir Putin and for France in the French Revolution. If that state over church relationships looks different, it's because Putin is here and France is there. They're at different sides of that sliding scale, but it's still state over church. Any questions or comments? You can kill physically as well as mentally, but I think in many ways the mental condition is much worse. I see more broken minds than broken bodies. Another way to kill someone is to destroy their mind. And in the end, they kill themselves, just like Stalin's wife. She shot herself on November 9. Nadezhda Sergeyevna Aliyeva was born in Baku to a revolutionary and a friend of Stalin. She was raised in St. Petersburg. Having known Stalin from a young age, the two married when she was 18, and they had 2 children. Aliyeva worked as a secretary for the Bolshevik leaders, including Vladimir Lenin and Stalin, before enrolling at the Industrial Academy in Moscow to study synthetic fibers and to become an engineer. Aliyeva had several health issues, which combined with her interest in pursuing an independent professional career, led to frequent arguments with Stalin, who wanted his wife to maintain a domestic role. On several occasions, Aliyeva contemplated leaving Stalin, but after an argument, she shot herself the night of November 9, 1932. That is such a pity. I mean, this was a very intelligent woman. And this is what this abuse does. It kills. So Tamina asks a question. When we have Egypt and Babylon, I thought the king, who is the head of the state, was the head of the church. Wouldn't that look like the state is over the church, just like the Pharaoh? Then Tess says, did everyone get that? I stated that Babylon is church over state. And if you go to the ancient king of the north in the 1260, it's church over state. But let's go to the statue of Daniel 2, which is the king of the north. Is this state over church or church over state? Is this statue, what is this statue? Church over state or state over church?
Church
Who
over
controls who?
state. Church over state, the statue.
Okay, what you're forced to say is that the king of the north is state over church. Let's remember the story of Daniel 6. I want to take us back to the very beginning. You have Eden after the sin. What mode of worship does God immediately introduce? What does he do for Adam and Eve after sin? What does God do immediately after Adam and Eve's sin? Anybody?
It sacrifices an animal to cover
Yes, he
them.
makes a sacrifice. Remember altars, priests, and temples?
Mhm.
If we can remember how Satan operates, what's he going to do? What is he going to do when he sees this?
Counterfeit it.
He's going to counterfeit. So what should we expect to see?
Temples, priests, and altars.
Temples, priests, and altars. Where did paganism come from? How did pagans learn how to sacrifice on an altar in a temple administered by a priest? How did they learn that?
Learned it from what God did.
Yep. Paganism is a direct counterfeit of the sanctuary. Okay. Immediately after Eden, God introduced altars and sacrifices, and before the flood, the counterfeit had already introduced altars and sacrifices, but now the counterfeit is sacrificing people. Let's look at the beginning of ancient Israel right here. I'll call it the glorious land. There we go. What method of government did God introduce in ancient Israel?
Theocracy.
A theocracy. So God brought his people out and set them up as a nation with a theocracy. It was a church-state relationship. God set up ancient Israel as a theocracy. And what is a theocracy? Can anyone define what a theocracy is and what it looks like? Does the religious leader control the country?
Like the Sanhedrin,
Say that again?
like the Sanhedrin.
Yeah.
It's the king and the church as one, embodied in one person.
Mm-hmm. What I want to suggest is that the religious leaders are the state. It's saying the same thing. It's a church-state relationship, but the church and the state are not separate entities. They're embodied in one person. So the theocracy is one person right here. So a theocracy is one person. Wait, hold on. Embodied in one person. So a theocracy is one person, but what is this person that has, oh, okay. A theocracy is one person, but what this person has is two hats. One and two, one person right here. One hat says church. Yes, go ahead.
Wouldn't this have been before they started having kings? So this would be back of when during the time of Samuel and
Yes.
Eli,
Yes, yes, it is.
before the kings and stuff.
Right. Yeah, you're right. So one is church, one is king. Okay. But there's just one person. Okay. Can we name this person? Can we think of anyone in the Bible that wore two hats, just like what Christine was saying? You said it.
Oh,
You actually mentioned his name.
Samuel.
Samuel, there you go. Samuel operated a theocracy, one person with two hats. He is head of the church and head of the state. Now we come to ancient Babylon, right here. What type of government must ancient Babylon have? Well, it's got to be the same, right? It's got to have a theocracy. Okay. I don't want to get stuck on Babylon, but this is a story of 4 kingdoms. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. These 4 kingdoms are a theocracy. One person is both head of religion and head of state. In ancient Israel, we talked about Samuel, but now we want to talk about Darius. In Daniel 6, this is Medo-Persia, and Darius is the counterfeit theocracy. So Daniel is Satan's counterfeit theocracy. Let's go to Daniel 6. So Darius favors Daniel, and the presidents and princes become jealous. So they go to the king with a plan. They say to Darius, make a decree. What did this decree say? You cannot pray to anyone but the king. You can't pray to any other gods. If you need something, the only being you can petition is your king. So Darius signs that decree. And when he sees Daniel arrested, what does he want to do? He wants to tear it up, right? But then his advisors come to him. And what do they say? What does his advisors say?
You can't do that.
The law can't be changed. But he's the king. Why can't Darius, the king, change the law? Why do they have a law that says the king himself cannot change his mind? The verses don't give us the answer. It just tells you he can't change the law. Does anyone know why Darius, the king, cannot change the law?
He's under the God hat.
yeah, he's under the God hat.
What?
It was under the God hat that the decree was made, and under the king hat, he cannot change it.
Okay,
Because the God hat is infallible.
right. What if he stood before just a picture. What if he stood before, Darius, stood before the people and said, I made a mistake. Why can't he do that? Why can't Darius do that?
Like Christine said, God is infallible.
Because, yes, that's true. Darius is working in a theocracy. So how many hats does he have?
2.
2.
He wears 2 hats, one king and one priest. He has a decree and he wants to change it. And there's a law that says he can't. Why would they have a law that says the king himself can't go against? When he signs this decree, what hat is he wearing? What hat is he wearing when he signs this decree?
The God hat.
Yes, he's wearing his God hat or his church hat. He sends a decree saying that no one can petition or pray to anyone but him. Because who is he? He's a deity. He's wearing a God hat. Then he looks with humanity and he sees that he's been tricked. And he wants to tear up that decree and save his friend. But what hat is he now wearing? What is it? He's wearing his state hat or his king hat. The law of the Medes and Persians say that the king cannot go back on his word because the king is a god or a demigod, and a god of any form cannot make mistakes. So if he signs a decree and all of his people believe he's infallible, then there is no mechanism for which he can say, I made a mistake. Can we therefore see that he's operating in a theocracy because he's head of the religion, which means he's a demigod, and he's also head of the state? Even if these two positions are embodied in one person, who has the most power? So out of these two hats, who has the most power?
Church.
Right. When he wears his God hat, he can do things that when he wears his king hat, he cannot undo. When you have a theocracy, it becomes a fine line. But this is a good story to illustrate how when it's embodied in one person, like in Daniel 6, it's clearly the church that's controlling the state. The king has no authority even to go against his own word. Does everybody understand this? Anybody want to add anything to it? The problem with Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome is that they all deify their kings. No one ever decided that Alexander was a good guy, and therefore we're going to call him Alexander the Great. Alexander hated his father. He may have been involved in his father's murder, but they did not have a good relationship. One of the reasons that they did not have a good relationship is because Alexander's mother was a priestess. She was a priestess in Epirus, she was a priestess. She claimed that Alexander was conceived by a relationship between her and a god. So Alexander was raised to believe that the king was not his father. He had himself named Alexander the Great because no one else had given him that name, because in his mind, he's a demigod. All of these were theocracies. They were church and state, but it's just one person. Any questions, comments? If you come down to the history of Christ, here, you have John and the Pharisees right here. And they're all excited because a deliverer has come to restore the theocracy right here, which is the church and state. It becomes perfectly reasonable that they would expect a restoration of the church and the state, but instead, God splits them. He splits the church from the state, and he continues to work through his church right here. He splits it. So that must have been a shock. Ancient Israel was a theocracy. Right here. Modern Israel does not claim to be a theocracy because we're not a state. That all changed in the history of Christ, which is why people had such an issue recognizing him. You could mark different times for this, so I'll mark 34 AD. So Satan has counterfeited from the beginning with altars and priests, temples and sanctuaries, and paganism. You come to the theocracy of ancient Israel and the theocracy of ancient Babylon, right here, Samuel and Darius. They leave the church and they leave the kingdom. At the end of ancient Israel, God splits his church, right here, from his state, and he continues to work through his church. So what does Satan have to do? Satan is going to counterfeit. He's going to split his church from his state. Here. He represents, who represents Satan's church? That's a question.
1260, you're talking about 1260, the papacy.
Well, yeah, the papacy, right. Who represents his state?
The kings.
That's right, the kings. You could say Clovis, but he no longer has any religious authority. In other words, the leader has no religious authority. The religion and the state have been fully torn apart. They are clear, separate entities. However, the religious entity is going to control the state entity. So the Pope is going to control Clovis, and Clovis is not a demigod. He has no spiritual authority. Does everybody understand that? It took Satan 500 years to catch up. However, Christ separated this theocracy right here. He pulled out his church and he operated through his church right here. Satan pulled apart his church and he operated through his church, through the papacy. The papacy has no political power, and modern Israel has no political power. Modern Israel, no political power. Papacy, no political power. Ancient Babylon had a state. Modern Babylon does not have a state. I mean, modern Babylon, sorry, over here. Ancient Babylon, modern Babylon. They can control the kings, but they're no longer one entity. They've separated. Everybody understand that? So this is how Satan has counterfeited from the beginning. Paganism was a counterfeit of the ancient sanctuary service. It was abolished at the cross. Now you had a new system. So Satan had to go from paganism to what? So Satan went from paganism to what?
Christianism.
Papalism.
Papalism, right. Papalism, because papalism is a counterfeit of Christianity. We baptize and they sprinkle. Paganism changed from papalism because the sanctuary system turned into the early church. Sanctuary system turned into the early church, Christian church. God's people changed their mode of operating. The reason Satan changed ancient Israel is, okay, so when you go from ancient Israel system of Moses to the early Christian church, God's people changed their mode of operating. The reason Satan changed from paganism to papalism was to counterfeit that exact thing. This Israel church. Here you have baptism, right here. So now you have sprinkling. You no longer have sacrifices here, so you're not going to have them here. So under papalism, you no longer have the sacrifices. Instead, we have the Lord's Supper up here. And what do they have? What do these people have?
Communion.
Yeah, well, you could say, yeah, the Mass, right? Communion. There was no Mass in paganism because there was no Lord's Supper in sanctuary service, okay? No Lord's Supper here, no Mass. Papalism is just counterfeiting the changes in the Christian dispensation. That's all they're doing. Okay, so what I'm trying to show is that Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome are still different from Egypt. They are still a church-state model, but in paganism, the church was in control of the state. Under Ptolemy, the church did not control him. He controlled the church because there wasn't much evidence that he even believed in the church. So we have paganism and papalism. Paganism and papalism. A system of sacrifice. Sanctuary, Moses, early Christian church, sanctuary, early Christian church. This is being counterfeited with the change from pagan to papalism. God started with a theocracy. Then he split his church. He split his church right here from the state. Satan started his theocracy down here and then separated his church from the state right here. So over here, you have Babylon. And Babylon, wait, hold on. Wait, so, yeah, Babylon. Babylon is state over church. And what do we call that? The king of the north. Am I on the right slide? Hold on. 33. Okay. Paganism, theocracy. Okay. Babylon is state over church. And what do we call that? The king of the north. Okay, there we go. And this is the king of the north. Okay. Hold that thought. Okay, so now we go. He's going to go back. Okay, now then he wants to tear us. Okay, so now Satan comes and he wants to tear these two apart, which is over here. He comes here and he wants to tear these two apart. And he has the kings, which is going to be Clovis and kings. So who gets to keep the name? The king of the north? Who gets to keep the name king of the north? What? And she says to hold that thought. We'll get back to that. You know, this one is kind of confusing. I'm sorry.
Did I miss something? Because I thought the king of the north was church over state.
Yes.
Hold on, let me try this. Let's try this all again. Okay, so we have paganism and papalism, a system of sacrificing. That's a system of sacrifice. Moses, early church, Christian church. This is being counterfeited with the change of paganism to papalism. God started with a theocracy. Then he split his church from the state, right here. Satan started his theocracy over here. And then he separates his church from his state over here. So over here, there's ancient Babylon. And ancient Babylon is state over church. That's what ancient Babylon is. State over church. And what do we call that? We call that state over church is king of the north.
Church over state.
Church, yeah, that's what it's king of the north. So when Satan comes over here,
Something's wrong.
Yeah, something's wrong because it's church over state is the king of the north. State over church is the king of the south.
oh, well,
So not to throw a rock in your presentation because you're doing a great job, but something maybe she misstated it.
I don't know. Okay, well, anyway, let's go through this. We might have more clarity.
Okay, yes.
So when Satan comes over here, right here, he wants to tear these two apart. Okay, so he's going to have Clovis. There's Clovis and the papacy. So who gets to keep the name the king of the north? She said king of the north. I don't know. Okay, so let's just keep going. Hold that thought. We'll come back to it. Okay, this is a comment from an audience, someone in the audience. This subject really moves me because I used to be Greek Orthodox, and when we were being baptized, we got the water sprinkled on us. The priests only spoke in Latin. Also at the funeral, it was all done in Latin. The people didn't understand anything, but they believed that this way is correct. For them, Jesus is still a little baby in Mary's hands. He didn't grow up. And then Tess comments. So for the camera, our friend, she said sister, but I changed it to friend. For the camera, our friend was just speaking about her history in the Greek Orthodox Church and their mindset in the system of sprinkling. Praise God that I saw our friend go into the water last year. So you have found a better way, hopefully to help many more come to the truth. Just like you said, many people have just never been shown any different, and in their ignorance, God winks. I love this. In their ignorance, God winks. Okay, let's go back and see how this works out. State and church, it's all one entity. It's all the king of the north. But now you split them. Who gets to keep the name? And Tamina says, both keep the name. Tess says, why both? Tamina says, because they used to be one. Tess says, what would you call one? Tamina says, when a man and a woman marry, they become one flesh. So Tess, so when they're married, they have the same last name. So now that they've been pulled apart, it's easier to see two separate people. Church and a woman, and state a man. They're still married, so who has the name? They have the same last name. So that's the answer. They both have the same. They're both the king of the north. Let's go to Daniel 11:3. And a mighty king shall stand up. Who is this king that stands up? Let's go to verse 2. The fourth shall be far richer than they all. Who do we apply this to? Because this is the king of the north. So we should be looking today to see who is the richest pope, because Elder Jeff is now teaching that Donald Trump is the last president based on this verse. Next, he'll say that the United States is not the king of the north. The papacy is. This is telling the story of the king of the north. In other words, this fourth, right here, is the king of the north. So Jeff needs to go back on his understanding of Donald Trump and find the richest pope that's ever been. Can you see his problem? So do we understand this? Is everybody understanding what's going on here?
Yeah. Nice picture.
Does anybody want to explain what's going on?
Belle and I are a little bit lost. Can you?
I was a little lost too, to honestly, I mean, because I don't have anybody to ask questions, but this is everything. This is exactly, I mean, I didn't make this up, This is the king of the north. As we progress, you'll understand it better. Elaine, do you have anything to say about this?
No, I was just looking up on the video and I posted an image that was from the video in there. So on the question of state over church, I think she was, based on the picture on the board, I think she was just noting that the king of the north is a state church combination, but maybe not necessarily without listening to it. I'm only hearing you. I didn't go back and listen, but that she's not noting that it's a state over church. It's just the two combined make the king of the north.
Yes.
I think that's what she's.
They're both. Yeah.
Not
right.
without listening to her, but I think what was meant is just that, like in the image, she doesn't have the line under there. The line kind of implies one over the other, if that makes sense.
Which this?
Yeah, without the line, because the line suggests it's state over church.
Yeah, but I think it has to be this way because this is the relationship between a husband. Well, I don't know. Yeah, you know what? We'll progress. Okay. In 2016, we studied all these verses on the king of the south versus the king of the north. We traced Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush Jr., Obama, and Trump. We traced all of them through Daniel 11, and through these verses, we identified 1798, 1989, Raphia, and Panium. We understood that the king of the south is a state and the king of the north is a state. If we were to go to verse 40, the king of the south is a state power, and he's fighting against another state power, though he identifies as the king of the north. Do you see that? They change. It changes from the king of the north. They can change. If Elder Jeff wants to say that the United States is not the king of the north, he has to scrap his entire understanding of Daniel 11, at least the last 5 years. He has to scrap his understanding of the first 3 verses, scratch the idea of Donald Trump being the 4th, which was this movement's entire argument about the last president, and then seriously reconsider verses 4 through 15 through Raphia and Panium, because that can't be the United States. So depending on your story, you can identify both the United States and the papacy as the king of the north, even back in the Millerite history. Okay, does anybody understand this? And can anybody explain this? Okay. Because I didn't understand about the stuff, you know, I don't know what was going on with Jeff at that time and how he was thinking. Okay, in the beginning of the French Revolution, Clovis or France put the Pope on the throne. And then he takes the Pope off the throne. We took that model to the United States. It says that he heals the deadly wound. So the same people that placed her on the throne then kills her. In some sense, we did identify Clovis as the king of the north, even though we apply that to kings. It's Clovis specifically, because in 1799, he's going to transform. He's going to go from church over state, or from this model to this model. From this model, church over state, to this model, state over church. Oh, okay. The king of the north, from the king of the north to the king of the south. From king of the north, Clovis transfers from the king of the north to the king of the south. The king of the north can be used to describe either church or state because they used to be one entity. And when they split, they still keep the name. Do we understand now? Does anybody understand? The king of the north can be used to describe either church or state because they used to be one entity. Remember, Clovis used to be here. He used to be church over state, but now he went over here and became state over church, but they're still, even though they're separate, they're still one entity. Even though they're split, they carry the same name, king of the north.
It's just a matter of who holds the power, the balance of power.
Yeah, exactly.
And
But it's still
north
considered the king of the north. Right. I was, you know what? I was confused. This was a really tough one for me. Because I didn't really have anybody to ask. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I had to watch all these videos and I still was a little bit confused. But anyway, I understand
I did
now.
put it on the board that way, but I did just go back and listen to it.
Yeah.
I muted so you guys didn't hear both going on. But what she says right at that moment is Babylon is state and a church.
Yeah.
So she's not saying church over state or state over, she's not saying state over church the way she wrote it on the board. She's just saying that they're both.
Yeah, they're both. Because at one time, this is the trick, the one time they were one entity.
Right, embodied in one.
Embodied in one. So
they still are the king of the north. They're just in two entities, but it's a matter of which one holds the power.
So even though Clovis, he was church over state, but then he came over here and he became state over church, he's still king of the north.
I think you're talking about France, right?
Or Clovis, what she specifically said.
Clovis was in the beginning, and then at the end, you're talking about
right, and then France.
Okay.
She mentioned Clovis in particular.
Yeah,
okay.
At the beginning, yeah.
So now do we kind of understand what's going on here? I don't want to confuse anybody. I know that in the class, people were really kind of stumped too. I mean, I was just like, wow, I almost didn't want to do this study because it was so confusing, you know? But anyway, they were in the class, they were a little bit stumped too. Okay, so Tamina asked.
Donna?
Yeah.
Just a question. So how does it help us if we use the marriage relationship?
Yes, that's why she put that marriage relationship there. That is exactly, Yes, that is why, thank you, Jackie, because that is why that marriage relationship is there.
Exactly.
Where is it?
I mean, it just defines it for me much more
Yes.
clearly,
Yeah,
because it carries the name is carried, the same name, or would you say the same position, or how would you describe that?
well, the man or the husband, he represents the state and the woman represents the church.
Right.
And so, I don't know, what was your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I said, how do you describe this then, when we're looking at it in this form of showing, your illustration here?
Yeah, I think that's the reason why she put the husband and wife here.
Yeah,
Because there's going to come a time, I mean, we all know that the king of the south is going to kill the church, right? I mean, we all know that, but she's
Right.
putting it in a situation like a relationship, so that, I mean, everybody in the class was kind of stumped too. So I had to go over this, like, I don't know how many times, because I was very confused myself, because I knew that, when you're looking at Putin and stuff, you're thinking king of the south, and then he's gonna, kill the church and stuff. But now look at this. This is the state, which is the husband, and this is the church, which is the wife. And they
Right.
represent the, that king of the north thing. So Putin can never be the king of the north, because he was never, he wasn't like Clovis, he wasn't,
exactly.
I forgot where I'm at. Wait, hold on. Let me
He
look.
was in control of the church.
Yeah.
He was in control of the church.
What? Say that
Clovis
again.
was in
Say that
control.
again.
That Putin is in control of the church instead
Yes.
of the church being in control of Putin.
Yeah.
Difference
Putin
between
has
the king of
no,
the north and the king of the
Yeah.
south.
yeah, the church has no power, no authority at all
Right.
under Putin.
I have a comment, Donna.
Yes.
It's your presentation is really clear. I think the problem is when you have so many different items to bring forth your point. That's what's confusing you, because you got the king of the north and the king of the south, and that changes, and then you got this and you got that.
Oh, you mean like this?
Right. But after you have it in front of you in a chart, or the way you have it laid out, it really does become clear. You just have to go over it in your mind over and over and over again, like you said.
Right.
And then it becomes clearer, because it's really, it can be confused. It really confusing, really
I think
confusing.
sometimes it can be overwhelming when you're looking.
Right,
So
right.
actually, so like what I wanted to do, I mean, I could have just read it and not done any of this, but
No,
like if I read, everything, and then I didn't point out, all this stuff, I don't know if it would have been as easily, and then you would just be staring at this thing. And I was told from someone that, I need to point and I need to, show where I'm at, so that's the only reason why I did that, because, and this, in particular, this study had a whole lot of stuff to put on there.
yeah.
And so normally we don't really have all this stuff going on with the, counterfeit and, and all that stuff to, Satan going out and doing all this. And all these are all on her chart too, maybe not the pictures. I mean, the statue and, all this stuff, she drew, but, it's just like how she had it on her thing, So I kind of wanted to make it as, she had a bigger platform,
It's a really good presentation.
Huh?
It's a really good presentation.
No, but I could see how it could be confusing. I don't want to confuse anybody, but
No, you're doing a good job.
Well, you're just showing back to that other one real quick,
okay, hold on. Uh-huh.
because we're looking at the counterfeit.
Yeah, this is the counterfeit right here,
Okay.
down here.
So the king of the south is a separate issue, not on this page.
No,
This is all what you're looking at here is just understanding the counterfeit to the true.
yeah,
And the king of the south is another story.
yeah, you're right. It's a totally different topic. She's not dealing with the king. This is, I mean, it's kind of confusing because this title is Manner of the King of the South, but it's really all about the King of the North.
Well, it's just, she's just showing how you get to equality, how you go from the world wars to the king of the north, king of the south. The geography tells you there's a king of the north and the king of the south. That's where, so then she's laying out the counterfeit to the true.
Yeah.
Showing how the counterfeit is different from the king of the south.
Right.
She's showing progression.
Yeah, and it's who holds the balance of power. And the counterfeit, the church holds the balance of power. And in the king of the south, the state holds the
The
balance.
state holds the power. Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. And she goes, and we go into that. I mean, where am I? Hold on. I'm glad you guys are talking about this because honestly, I was a little confused. Okay. And Tamina asks a lot of great questions. Okay, so Tamina asks a question. When we see that there are one entity, which church and state, and they split and keep both names, which is the king of the north, can we do the same for the king of the south? Because you also have church and state, and could the church also be called the king of the south? Good question. And this is Tess. With the Russian Orthodox Church, I think you can see it that way, but it's much harder to split it from the state. You can see them together as the king of the south. However, the church is just a puppet of the state. You don't see it act with any authority or independently. Anytime it does something, it's being forced by the state. For example, in order to hurt Ukraine, Vladimir Putin is going to split the Russian Orthodox Church because Ukraine is Russian Orthodox. We don't look at that as saying the church is doing we don't look at that as something the church is doing because the church has no power. We know the power comes from the state. I think that's why we don't approach the king of the south in the same way, because we never see the church do anything except to be a tool of the state. Once you reverse that order and put the state in power, king of the north, king of the south, you're not going to see an independent church with any authority. And she says, does that make sense? So does that make a little bit more sense?
The church, when it comes to the king of the south, the church is not called the king of the south. It has no power.
Yeah. So this, and then so this was not really a study. You can use different ways to show that they're both the king of the north. And this isn't even the best way. It's just one rule of thought, because we talked about the king of the north being a theocracy, gets split, just like what a counterfeit of God did in the Christian dispensation. So, like I said, this was a really difficult, I almost didn't want to do, I almost was like, you know what, I don't think I want to do this one because it was confusing for me, as it was for some of the people in this thing. Okay. We will just quickly summarize. I've made an attempt in a short period of time to prove that the king of the north is church over state in the history of paganism. We did our model of agriculture, and we spent pretty much this whole class going through different kingdoms. We touched briefly on the Soviet Union, briefly on France. We also discussed Ptolemy. We didn't look at the quotes, but we all knew them. About the Pharaoh in the time of Moses and atheistic France, we just brought those quotes to memory. We didn't really look them up. We considered the king of the south as a sliding scale. It's all state over church, but there are variables. It can look like headship. Then you can have this sliding scale of more and more control, like descending freedom and increasing abuse, until the state starts to hurt the church and ultimately tries to destroy it. This is the relationship between a man and a woman, and there can be varying degrees of abuse all the way down to murder. I think there's a word for it in English. It's called femicide. Femicide or feminicide is a sex-based hate crime term broadly defined as the intentional killing of women or girls because they're female, though definitions vary depending on its cultural context. It's certainly a problem where I've been, and it's a problem in Australia. If you spend a couple of months in Africa, where in many ways the government doesn't even protect the women, and depending on the husbands they marry, they're somewhere on the sliding scale of control. However, it often ends in murder. When we talk about atheism, the state killing the church, that is just the ultimate form, but there are varying degrees of state over church. Then we looked at paganism in the model of the King of the North and how that was church over state. We paraphrased Daniel 6, the story of Darius, that he's a counterfeit of Daniel and that they have two hats, and it's a theocracy. I know they went off when it came to the kings, but I think ancient Babylon went off as well, but the church still controlled the state. And Darius's God controls Darius's king. And then very briefly, we built that whole model to pick up on a couple of other counterfeits. The sanctuary system changed to the early Christian church. Paganism changed to papalism. Paganism is a counterfeit of the sanctuary system with its sacrifices, altars, temples, and priests. Papalism is a counterfeit of the Christian dispensation, where you have the mass and sprinkling and all of those other counterfeits. We show that the counterfeit system is a theocracy, it's church and state, and is embodied in one entity, and that one entity is called the King of the North. Okay. And it's the only evidence, or even the best evidence. It's not the only evidence, and nor even the best evidence for it, but I'm saying it's just one entity, the King of the North. And when the split into Clovis and the papacy, right here, they both get to keep the name. Depending on your story, you can find that name referring both. And this movement recognized that a long time ago. It's built into our application of Daniel 11. And if Elder Jeff wants to turn back on that, as was said at the German conference, he has to keep wiping out everything he's believed in particular, the understanding of Raphia and Panium and the last president. And he's going to do that. And are there any final thoughts? And that's it. We're at the end. I don't want to do the prayer right now because I want to ask, I hope I didn't confuse people, because this was a hard one for me.
That's why it's such a good reason to do the review for all of us.
Yeah, I know.
Because we really need to understand these, especially because I think next, which we have a lot on our plate, but next we ought to go back and review some of the French Revolution information.
Yes.
Because what I think you were saying was when you were talking about Clovis in the counterfeit line, that Clovis was France in the beginning. He was the first son of the papacy. He was the King of the North. But at the end, at the French Revolution, it's reversed, and France is the King of the South, not the King of the North.
Yes, he says in the beginning of French Revolution, Clovis in France put the Pope on the throne, and then he takes the Pope off the throne. We took that model to the United States, and it says that he heals the deadly wound. So the same people that placed her on the throne kills her. In some sense, we did identify Clovis as the King of the North, even though we applied that to kings. But it's Clovis specifically, because in 1799, he's going to transform. He's going to go from the church over state, or from this model, which is this one, to this model, which is this one.
Yeah, I think when she's using his name, she's referring to France.
Yeah.
In your very first sentence, it says Clovis or France, put Rome. So she's using Clovis, but it's France being the premier king of the kings of Europe. And it was France that put put the Pope on the throne. And in the end, it's France that takes the Pope off the throne,
Right,
where it persecutes the church.
right.
And
Right here, when she talks about Clovis, it's in 1799. She's specifically talking about him, but I think you're right what you're talking
yeah,
about.
yeah, it's not actually him, it's just France, Clovis as France. So
Right.
as the king of the South. And so because that history is a history that Elder Parmenter says will be repeated,
Right.
that because you had the kings of Europe then, right?
Mhm.
And then you have, when we go into the Sunday law, you're going to have the 10 kings. I'm sorry, I don't know if, yeah, the 10 kings. So so those 10 kings give their power to the beast. They put the
Right.
papacy on the throne. And the premier of those 10 kings is who? In our history, Sunday law. Who's the premier? Huh?
Who?
No.
Trump?
Who's the premier king of the 10 kings?
Oh,
United States?
United States?
United States.
Okay, yeah, right here.
So, and we know it's the Protestants that enact a Sunday law, right?
Right.
And so it's the United States that puts the papacy back on the throne.
Right.
So if you follow what he's saying, and we need to study this, because if you follow what he's saying, if that history is repeated, then when you get to the, you go through that period of time where it repeats the 1260, certainly not 1260 years, but it repeats the 1260, then you need to look at what France did when they turned into the king of the South and persecuted in the church.
Yeah. So we
But
really
we need to
do.
understand that to be able to understand what it's going to look like going.
Yeah, we do.
So then you have in the United States, you have that conservative liberal split. So I think it's somewhere in that happens, that the United States, based on what he's saying, you would see that the United States then turns into the king of the South, just as France did.
Right.
Now, I don't know that that's all accurate. I'm just going by what he said in that history, repeating it. That's what it looks like. We don't know what it looks like, and it needs to be understood more clearly. But that's what happened there. The France, in the beginning, the premier of those kings of Europe put the papacy on the throne, and at the end, France, as the king of the South, persecutes and to destroy the church.
Right.
And why, then it's understanding why did they do that? Why did France do that? What brought France to that place where they would burn the Bibles?
Oh, they were so disgusted of the Protestants, of the church.
And then go back to Elder Parmenter's
Hypocrisy.
studies. Yeah, go back to his studies in Brazil where he shows that with the goddess of reason, that they use reason.
Right. Because they looked at those Catholics as a bunch of unreasonable, ridiculous people that.
So think about that during the Sunday law history. What are people going to look at the Protestants as?
Oh, goodness.
With the laws that they're going to make. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, they're going to be hated.
So, yeah, a lot to be understood. But I would recommend, if you haven't already, go back to, as we do these studies, go back and watch the Brazil presentations again, where he talks about Sophia and wisdom, the goddess of reason, and the French Revolution.
The Brazil, could you post that Brazil list or somewhere? Or
yeah, I'll find it.
I'd like to, because I have to choose something anyway. So yeah, that'd be good. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry I caused confusion today.
No, it was a heavy study.
It's very, I swear, I in the middle of it, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to tell them I don't want to do this.
I've been there before.
I was like, okay, but then the Lord said, no, you got to do it because.
Well, it actually helps you in the long run. It actually helps you.
It did. I mean, I'd be
But Donna,
over it.
Donna, it wasn't your presentation that was confusing. It was the way the Elder Tess wrote that on the board, where it looked like it was state over church. That's what.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe did I write that? Did I put it right?
You wrote it just like it was on the board. You did.
No,
you did it.
Just take the line out from underneath it is all. Take the line. If you remove the line, it takes away the appearance that it's state over church.
Uh-huh.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So with the line, it says state of her church, but what her words were is state and church. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes,
State and a church. Babylon was state and a church.
right, right. I gotta go back and look at that. There, right here.
It was a really good presentation.
Yeah, it is
agree.
complicated.
Really good.
That's why we are reviewing all this, because it is complicated to grasp all this history.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing that we did it as a class, so that way
Yeah.
people can see.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, this was a class, and so they had, you know, and even as it was a class, it was not an easy class, and people were getting stumped.
Mhm.
So I wish that this was a class too, because I needed help. I didn't know, this is more advanced to me, far beyond any, you know, from my mind. So I was like, wow, I was having a hard time. The stuff that was in here, I didn't know a lot of the stuff, you know, so it was really hard.
Church over state, state over church, both
So-
are bad. That's why there's separation of churches.
Yeah. And then, you know, and I looked at the, you know, the manner of the king of the south, and it's all about the king of the north, really. It's just, it was confusing for me.
You did a good job.
Yeah, we'll get it. That's why we're reviewing.
Thank you.
That's why we're reviewing. I did put it in the chat, and if you want to.
Okay, good. I'm gonna stop share.
And thank you for pushing through it
Your
and doing it.
visuals really make it a lot easier to understand. So thank you for those visuals.
Really? Okay.
Yes,
If
yes,
you guys
yes.
don't want the visuals, I won't put them, but you know, they kind of help me.
No, what Francisco was saying, not that the visuals, it was just that Elder Tess had put so many different variables in there.
Yes, this was a really deep study.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know where my little thing, okay, how do we get that window back?
Oh,
Escape? Oh.
escape key on your keyboard.
Yeah, I
Okay,
did
got
the
it.
same thing when I did that.
Sorry. Got it. Okay, so now, just stop. Okay, good. Whew.
Well, let's at least close in prayer, and we can have discussion. If you want, I just want to stop the recording. So if you want to close in prayer. Christine, would you like to close in prayer?
Yeah, sure. Dear Heavenly God, we thank you so much for this presentation. We realize that there was a lot of different variables in it. We pray that you will fill us with your Holy Spirit and give us clarity on anything that we didn't understand. If there are more presentations that can be added to it to clarify, we pray that you will guide us and lead us to those. We thank you for working through Donna for this presentation. There was a lot in it, and she put a lot of work into it, and it was we were really blessed to have this question come up so we could address it as a class. And we know that your hand is in all things, and so we appreciate that you brought this up so we could bring more clarity to it. We thank you, Lord, for your love and your mercy and your grace. We pray as we go to eat lunch, many of us will go to eat lunch. We pray, Lord, that you will bless the food and that it may bless our bodies. And we pray that everyone can come back here in an hour, and after we close, and we could all come back together to study, I think, Isaiah as a group. We praise you, Lord, and we thank you, and we pray all this in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.